Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us here tonight. My name is Dave Tamulonis. I'm the events manager at the Erie Downtown Partnership. We were really blessed with some excellent weather here tonight, and we're glad we're finally able to take advantage of that and have some in-person gatherings once again here in downtown Erie. We're very proud to bring you the first event in our Listen to Your Neighbors lecture series, featuring Marcus Atkinson and Brandon Wylie. Before I introduce Ellie from OpenedEyes, I want to shout out some upcoming events here in our downtown. Tonight at Room 33, you can catch a couple incredibly talented Arabic musicians performing for World Refugee Day this weekend as soon as this event is over. Tomorrow night and into Saturday, Erie will have a Juneteenth celebration at State Street and 12th Street featuring vendors from our local black-owned businesses, music, food, and beverages. That event is through the Booker T. Washington Center and organized by the city and Angela McNair. For more info, you can check out the Facebook page for Erie's Juneteenth celebration. And on Sunday, June 20th, here in Perry Square, we're holding our first downtown farmers market here on the west side of Perry Square with produce vendors, handmade goods, local businesses, and more. Produce vendors will accept SNAP, WIC, and farmers market vouchers. Now, I'm glad to introduce Ellie Vahey from OpenedEyes, who will be introducing our speakers for the evening.
Thanks, Dave. I'm Ellie Vahey, like he said. I am proud to be a part of the organization OpenedEyes, and we are proud and grateful to be taking part in this speaker series, Listen to Your Neighbors. Over the course of the past year and a half, OpenedEyes has really tried our very best to get out and enhance cultural competence in every different facet that is available to us. And Brandon Wylie, who you'll hear from in just a bit, has done a really excellent job of kind of tweaking things for each particular organization to fit the needs, whether it's, educational programming or diversity training, things like that. Just cultural competence is really what we're trying to convey and essentially open people's eyes to. So you'll hear from Brandon himself with a more personal story as to what really kind of got him initially started in founding OpenedEyes in it was 2004. 14. I put you back a decade. You were a little younger then. 2014. So he's been working on this for quite a while, and it's really a beautiful thing to be a part of. And we also have Marcus Atkinson. Both gentlemen have received degrees from local institutions. Brandon got a degree at Gannon, and Marcus Atkinson is a Strong Vincent grad, and then spent some time in Atlanta and came back here in 2005 after obtaining his degree down there. Both gentlemen, I think you will really enjoy hearing from. They both have a lot to share, and will really do a fantastic job of giving you a different bit of perspective to hopefully open your eyes to their worlds just a smidge more. So without further ado, the founder of Publix Voice Media, Marcus Atkinson.
Thank you, Ellie. Good evening, everyone. I'm sure one of the first things you will notice is I do not have an OpenedEyes t-shirt on. I feel somewhat slighted. I did put a request in for Brandon. Brandon insisted that he would bring me one, and alas, here I am with no t-shirt on. I assure you that my eyes are open and that I'm woke and that I'm an ally to people like Brandon. Trust and believe. I moderated an event for Erie Insurance on Monday, and it was the Why All Americans Should Celebrate Juneteenth event. It was a pleasure and an honor to do so. My mother is a retiree of Erie Insurance. I always tell people that I'm an Erie Insurance kid. I was raised on Erie Insurance. And it was good to take part in something so robust. The conversation was on point. We talked about a lot of the deeper things where Juneteenth is concerned. And we helped people understand something that very few people knew a lot about up until the last year or two. And I was pleased to look online and see that President Biden signed Juneteenth into law as a federal holiday. Yes. Because certainly it's an American holiday. It's frustrating to see people try to parse that out and separate it as if it is just quote unquote African American history or black history. It is American history. And so it's being honored as such. The question of, Marcus, how has race affected you personally? I've been asked that time and time again. How has race affected you personally? And I'm always struck by that question. How am I supposed to receive that question? How am I supposed to process that question? Is it a veiled way of saying society really isn't that racist anymore? How have you been personally impacted by racism? Is it a veiled way of saying people complain too much about racism? How have you been personally impacted by racism? And when I'm asked that question, I am stuck thinking about the relatives of my family that I have met personally and the journeys of my family that I have heard about and studied personally. I think about our family reunions on the paternalistic side of the family and on the maternalistic side of the family. On the Atkinson side of the family, I've oftentimes shown a calendar that showed this proud matriarch and patriarch of the Atkinson family, you know, Mama Lula and Papa Zeke. And then it talks about their journey from slavery. And we read their story at every family reunion, so that each and every generation had a firm understanding as to what price was paid for people like myself to go to Clayton State University, for people like myself to work as an executive director once upon a time, for people like myself to stand before you and say the things that I'm saying today. What price has been paid? And then I go to my mother's side of the family, and I show a T-shirt that we've all worn with my great-great-grandfather on the front, Watt Arrington, who was a South Carolina slave. And I think about his journey on that side of the family. I think about the slave narratives that were handed down to me, and you will read the story of one Jack Atkinson, who was a slave in Georgia. All of these narratives come flooding through my mind when people say, Marcus, how has racism personally affected you? I've mentioned my great-grandmother on several occasions, one of the first African-American educators in the South, one of the first people of color in the South to obtain a college education when most African-Americans only went to third grade, roughly, if they made it that far. It was one of the first black teachers in the South, and she went to the same college that Alex Haley went to, Alcorn University. And she was the genesis of this educational journey for people like myself in our family. I think about all of these things when people say, Marcus, how has racism personally affected you? And so it begs the question, have we even gotten to the point of asking that question when we haven't dealt with everything that we've spoken about in the first 5 minutes of the talk? Have we even gotten to the part where you say, well, Marcus, how has this affected you? Can we deal with all of that first before you even ask me that question? And seeing that we are coming out of celebrating or coming out of this analyzation of Juneteenth on Monday with Erie Insurance, we're going into a weekend where we're celebrating Juneteenth. I want to focus a bit more on the struggles that have led up to this moment as we talk about listening to your neighbors, because I have a sense that we've listened to our neighbors for a lot of years. Have we listened with an empathetic ear is my question. Have we listened with an empathetic ear? I think about my own journey, and I think of community and faith and how those two things have collided to really define a lot of what you've seen from me over the last 11 to 12 years. I think about the journey of people like Dr. King. Faith and community collide. And I think about even when you go as far back as the institution of slavery, faith and community collide. I want to talk about some of that today as we talk about listening to your neighbor. Whether or not you ascribe to the Bible talks about this whole idea of being a neighbor in Luke chapter 10, verse 25 through 37. Even if you don't go to church, you know the parable of the Good Samaritan. Show of hands, you've heard the parable. Thought it was interesting that from a scriptural standpoint, he goes in and tries to redefine in the mind of the listeners, Jesus is at that time, who in fact is your neighbor. Because at that time, he understood that that was a loaded term and that people had this pigeonholed view or outlook as to who their neighbor was. And they had their own reasons for defining certain people as their neighbor. And he went after that. And so it made me think about a neighborhood in a very literal sense. And if you lived in a neighborhood, if you can picture this mixed development with all of these people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, if you can picture this mixed development for people from different cultural backgrounds, if you can picture this mixed development, some people are elderly, some people are younger, some have children, some don't. If that neighborhood was under some sort of threat, the neighbors would come together and say, how do we mitigate this threat? How do we come together against this threat? Is it people breaking in? Is it a serial killer on the loose? Is it damaging property? Either way it goes, something has laid siege to this neighborhood. Under situations like that, you would probably give ear to each and every voice in that neighborhood in order for you to come to a workable solution for you all as a neighborhood to come together and get rid of whatever it was that was threatening this community. And so what I want to challenge all of us to do in a community sense, just like they asked in the Bible, who's your neighbor? How are you defining your neighbor? We're talking about listening to your neighbor. But if you in your mind have a pigeonholed definition of who your neighbor is, anyone outside of that definition, even if they say something to you, it will fall on deaf ears. We have to do the hard work of challenging ourselves to say, who's my neighbor? How do I genuinely view that term? How do I genuinely view my neighbors? From the book, it'll say, love your God with your whole heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. It sounds very Pollyanna. Sounds very easy. It's very difficult to do, especially when we have this preconceived definition of who our neighbor is. I want to talk about a Bible study that I attended Thursday at my church, the House of Prayer, 21st in German. My pastor, Daryl Craig, Brother D, as some of you may know him by, is very good and very big on deconstructing religious thought, not spiritual thought. Religious thought. And in that Bible study last weekend, one of the things that we talked about was something called the Slaver's Bible. Any of you familiar with this? Slaver's Bible. There was actually a Bible used on plantations, and the whole intent and purpose of this Bible was to make sure that slaves understood that the condition that they were in was not only justified, but that they should be beholding to those that enslaved them. When slavery was legal, and sidebar, I want you to hold on to that term because I'm going to quote something from Dr. King soon. When slavery was legal, this was used to help justify everything that was going on. And in this Bible study, we were helped to understand and appreciate the psychological warfare that has gone into slavery and race relations in this country. I want to read a couple of excerpts from two different websites, one from history.com, the other one from NPR, as they talk about this Slaver's Bible. It says, you have different verses in the Bible. One verse tells slaves to obey their masters. There were a lot of verses that abolitionists could and did use to argue against slavery, but you wouldn't find those in the heavily redacted slave Bible. Most of the Old Testament is missing, and only about half of the New Testament remains. Now, mind you, there's only 2 known copies of this Bible that exist to this very day. I encourage you to look all of this up. Again, most of the Old Testament is missing. Only about half of the New Testament remains. Why? So that the enslaved Africans in the Caribbean islands of Jamaica, Barbados, Antigua couldn't read or be read anything that might incite them to rebel. The slave Bible was actually titled, the actual title, Parts of the Holy Bible Selected for the Use of the Negro Slaves. That was the title of this publication. That was the title. And this is a quote from Anthony Schmidt, and he's a curator at Washington, D.C., their Museum of the Bible. Whoever the slave Bible's editors were, he said, they're really highlighting portions that would instill obedience. The one copy that they have is on loan from Fisk University. You may or may not be familiar with Fisk University. If you've ever heard of W.E.B. Du Bois, he was an 1888 graduate of Fisk University. They had a copy of these, one of 2 copies still floating around, and they gave it to this museum so that they can go ahead and show people the existence of this. About 90% of the Old Testament in this book is missing. 90%. And 50% of the New Testament is missing in this book that they used on plantations as the Bible. Put in another way, there are 1,189 chapters in a standard Protestant Bible. This Bible contained only 232. 232. The psychological warfare. First slave Bible was published in 1807, 3 years after the Haitian Revolution ended. Why is that significant? That revolution was the only slave revolt in history in which enslaved people successfully drove out their European oppressors to form a new nation. And it increased American and European paranoia that the people that they would oppress would one day rise up. And so the need for psychological warfare was arisen. This could have been the motivation. If you look throughout this book, several accounts, as we pointed out, have been taken out. The whole story of Moses and the Exodus, gone, because it encouraged the freed slaves. The story of Joseph being in prison, still in this book. Why? Because Joseph accepted his lot in life as a slave and as an unjustified slave. That is still in the book. Passages that emphasize equality between groups of people were also excised. This included, there's neither Jew or Greek, there's no bond or free, there's neither male or female, for ye are all one in Jesus Christ. For those who are not into the Bible, trust me, I'm going somewhere with this that is not all about the Bible. Keep following me, please. It also doesn't contain the book of Revelation. But in contrast, one of the passages that remain was one the proponents of slavery loved to cite. Ephesians 6:5, servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ. Yes, that one was not only in there, was celebrated time and time again. So, Marcus, what does this have to do with you as a member of the pastoral community for the last 5 years? And as somebody that was raised under a rigid religion, was very dogmatic, I was made to understand firsthand how much religion, not faith, not spirituality, can be and has been used as the opiate of the masses, in particular with race relations. Religion has actually been the thing that has encouraged people to not listen to their neighbors subliminally, sometimes overtly. Although Jesus gave them one thing, religion gave them something completely different. Not listening to their neighbor became the norm. The Bible continues to be a tool of manipulation. Two hotly contested scriptures. Paul wrote in one scripture in Romans 13:1, everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities. You know where I'm going with this. His fellow Bible writer Peter wrote something very similar. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority. Scriptures like these are scriptures that have had people on opposite sides of the fence politically, racially, ethnically rolling their sleeves up and having at it. You know why? Because the church who agrees with who's sitting in office is going to use this scripture. And they will conveniently hide behind scriptures like this and say, yeah, but the Bible says, brother, that we need to submit ourselves to authority. Nah, I know there's some dirty stuff going on. Don't get me wrong. I know this race relation stuff. I don't agree with that either. I'm just trying to be a Christian. The Bible says, submit themselves unto authority. Dr. King dealt with the same thing. So let's take it to arguably the most celebrated civil rights figure in all of America, black, white, or other. And we want to frame the same argument about listening to your neighbor versus listening with an empathetic ear, with a heart for learning, with a heart for yearning to cross over in this area. Dr. King's famous letter, the letter from Birmingham jail. We all know I have a dream. You will hear that 15 times every King holiday. I have a dream. And it's arguably one of the best speeches ever written. He is arguably the best orator man has ever known outside of Jesus. But when I hear people say, well, you should be more like King when they see protesters, I'm thinking, did you really know Dr. King? Let's inspect the contents of this letter from Birmingham jail. It was written on April 16, 1963. After being criticized for the acts of civil disobedience that he helped to lead, he writes this letter. Understand how he starts this letter. My dear fellow clergymen. I didn't write it, I'm reading it. My dear fellow clergymen. Are you out there in cyberspace watching on one of the pages? Well, does it really say that, Pastor? Don't shoot the messenger. Don't put it in the chat box. This guy's out of pocket. I want to read a section of this letter from Birmingham jail, and I want to talk a little bit about my experiences in Erie, because I think that Dr. King frames it well, and I think in many, many ways we are still in this space, so bear with me for just a minute. It's a very long letter, but I just extracted one part of it for the sake of this Listen to Your Neighbor series. Again, people heard Dr. King. They heard the speeches. Did they really listen? Again, my dear fellow clergymen, in our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. He's trying to debunk this whole idea of, well, we're hiding behind. Note I said hiding. We're hiding behind the fact that in Scripture, we should be subjective to government. King was pushing back. Said the Boston Tea Party was a massive act of civil disobedience. What are you talking about? He said we should never forget, this is very powerful, we should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. Let that sit for a second. Everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany, these are the words of Dr. King, was legal. And everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at that time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying that country's anti-religious laws. In other words, I would genuinely hear my neighbor as opposed to just listening. I would listen with an empathetic ear. Back to the words of Dr. King. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. And again, don't shoot the messenger. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of injustice, who constantly says, and this is the bane of my existence, I agree with you in the goal that you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a quote unquote more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Much more bewildering than outright rejection. The line about this demographic that he's going after, and I say this respectfully, I've spoke to a person before and they talked about the Black Lives Matter protests. And they push back against the fact that I've read about Black Lives Matter. I went to their website. I don't like what the organization stands for. Take that out of it. Is the premise not true? Let's say that the organization is flawed. Is the premise not true? People would bring up things like black on black crime. Let's address that. Because black on black crime is a tragedy. And it, too, is the bane of my existence. It is something people like myself go after on a regular basis. It's something like that. It's things like that we have constant conversations with ourselves, our children, and our sons about. But be clear about this. African Americans in America do not have the power to make anyone's existence overwhelmingly difficult. Asian Americans in America do not have the power to make anyone's existence in America overwhelmingly difficult. The LGBTQ community, I can say the same thing. The Latin American community, I can say the same thing. Like Dr. King was talking about, the soft, tacit power of mainstream white America carries more weight and has for every juncture in history than anything. And Dr. King shifted his focus and said, if this demographic listened to their neighbors, if this demographic said enough, if this demographic said this is wrong, then things would end. But if this demographic, as he so eloquently puts it, says, I agree with you in the goals you seek, but I cannot agree with direct action. If this demographic paternalistically believes that they can set the timetable for another person's freedom or civil rights or human rights, who lives by a mythological concept of time, who constantly advises Negroes, New Americans, whomever, to wait for a more convenient season. Marcus, what's been your experience in Erie? I am one of the few people of color, and Brandon can say the same thing, that has had an opportunity to sit in every kind of room imaginable. The conversations that you read about in the newspaper, I sit in the rooms for. The people that you read about in the newspaper, I'm related to or I know. I'm in every room in this city. And here's what I have discovered. The soft, tacit, passive power of our mainstream white brothers and sisters, and I say white brothers and sisters because we're in this together, carries more weight than anything. And when that demographic pushes back, things change. When that demographic says, I'm just not comfortable, let's do a forum so that we can hear what our neighbors are saying. Let's do something at our church with a group of these pastors and a group of these pastors so we can show our parishioners that we are hearing what other people are saying. Let's write an article so we can show that we are hearing what other people say. Are you really listening to your neighbor? Because if you were, how could we still be in this condition? That soft power is applied and it leads to leadership cowardice. You see people who run institutions, they give in to this soft undercurrent of power that's going on from these parishioners. You see this undercurrent of soft power from voters, this undercurrent of soft power from constituents. On the outside, some of the very same people that will shake your hand and go golfing with you are also the ones behind closed doors that say, I just don't know if we're ready for that. As harsh as that may sound. And we have to come to the full realization of that realistic fact before we ever cross over as a society. When given the opportunity to come up here and talk today, I wanted to take it here because where Juneteenth is concerned, many of us find ourselves regurgitating the same historical facts, and it amazes us how much people don't know. When we commemorated the fall of Black Wall Street, and people would say, Marcus, I watched that. I didn't know. How's that possible? How's that possible if we are listening to our neighbors in this country? I did a teacher in service. And any teacher that's watching this will tell you, yeah, I was there. I did a teacher in service several years ago when Dr. Badams was still here. And we talked about a lot of African-American history, a lot of American history that featured people of color. And we did a lot of sessions involving this. And it was a robust discussion, and people were enjoying the discussion, and they felt like they were learning. And afterwards, we did a little exercise. I said, okay, so listen, let's do this. Everyone in here is educators. Let's shout out the colleges that everybody went to, and we're hearing Penn State, and some people went to Edinburgh, and some people went to Gannon. Some people may have went out of town to Clayton State University. Some went to Kent State and everything else. Great, writing down all these colleges. Let's talk about the disciplines, okay, or the degrees. Who's got the master's degree? Who's got the doctorate degree? We're writing all of these things down, all of these things. And when we get done writing, I asked one simple question, and Dr. Badams sat in the front row. We have a room full of educators with degrees in educations, master's degrees, doctoral degrees, 13 years on the job, 20 years on the job. I said, show of hands, if all of the African-American history we spoke about today was new information, and almost every hand went up. And I posed a very simple question. How is that possible outside of the fact that there's an intentional effort to suppress information about this demographic? Can you see the frustration of mainstream America? How is the average person ever going to learn about the rich and robust diversity of this country if you, as an educated and seasoned educator, tasked with the responsibility of educating the next generation, you don't know? You don't think that's intentional? You don't think that's on purpose? But you know what happened in Germany verbatim. You know what happened with the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. You were taught what you were supposed to teach children. And my question is, when do you push back against that? When do you say, I'm going to listen to my neighbor? And what does that mean? That when things like Juneteenth come up, when the conversation of Black Wall Street comes up, to do what you do for everything else. When you see on the news, Kim Kardashian had another baby. Did she really? What's she name? Let me get my Google out. What's she name her? Really? Anything that's important to us, we tickle this super phone and we get all the information we need. And what would it look like for your neighbor to say, this is what life has looked like for my family? Look it up. Take it to your meetings at the Erie Club. Take it to the golf course at Lakeshore. Take it to the job in the boardroom and say, nah, that's not BS. I actually looked that up. We need some policy changes at our ends. This stuff is right. And my second question is, how do I not know this? There's an intentional problem. And we can't dance around it, and we've been doing that. I'm honored and privileged to be involved in the conversations. But please hear it clearly. America, with this great reckoning with race that we've had in 2020, I can't even say America's at its breaking point. This conversation is officially over. It's broken. People are here. They're here. For you to say, well, we're going to introduce this, one person at a time. No. We're going to come up with a soft shoe approach. No. We need to listen to our neighbors and be empathetic, to actually hold that thing with our neighbors and say, I'm in it with you. I will suffer with you. I will walk with you. There's a meme, and I'll head toward the finish line on this. There's a meme that said, you are lucky Black folks just want reparations and not revenge, or justice and not revenge. And I don't say that to be facetious. I want you to think about something. I've said in meetings when they say, well, Marcus, all lives matter. We know that. History shows you that we as people of color get that. Even during, you look at slavery, when slaves were freed, a lot of Black folk wouldn't leave because they loved the people that they worked for. We understood that. I'm the board chair of a neighborhood center, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Center. I grew up in this center. I'm very proud of it. Our board is mixed. Our person who handles accounting is Asian. My son wrestles for the program. 2 of the coaches are white. The lead coach is Black, assistant Black head coach, Latino coach. It is a mixed bag of everything. And it's an institution that was started by people of color. Don't tell me all lives matter. People of color have shown you that they understand that. Is it generally understood and appreciated? There's the challenge. It's not neat. It's not pretty. It's not the feel-good conversation you signed up for. Any complaints, direct them towards Open Eyes. Brandon has big shoulders. He can carry them. But we can't move past where we are as a nation unless these very real conversations happen. And there's some real action steps taken. I'm encouraged by the fact that the business community, the church community are all at least starting to understand. But I led with the church because the church has been one of the biggest problems in this area. The institution that is supposed to set the bar has cast the lowest bar of all institutions. And if you're a member of the pastoral community watching this, I'm challenging you to refute that claim. And it shouldn't be the case. I'm speaking on Sunday at my church, and there's several others are speaking as well. And one of the things that I'm saying during that sermon broken up is that I have met so many quote-unquote atheists who have studied Jesus, not the church, not religion, who have studied Jesus. One guy in particular I talk to all the time, staunch atheist, and he would say, look, man, I follow that dude. I ain't going to that church, but I follow that dude. And what's my point here? The point is the freedom in true unconditional love leads to listening to your neighbor. That type of freedom leads to listening to your neighbor. And when you substitute that for a personal agenda, it leads to what we are all living now, compartmentalized chaos. Period. Let it challenge you. Let it agitate your spirit. But for God's sakes, Be a change agent and help change it. When you have an opportunity to not just hear your neighbor, but to listen to the cries of all of our brothers and sisters, and to not only listen, but to hold it with them and say, how do we deal with this together and not take ourselves out of it? That's you. I got my stuff over here. No, we got stuff. How do we hold this together? That empathetic listening to your neighbor changes lives and it changes communities. Marcus Atkinson, thank you so much for listening today. I appreciate Open Eyes for allowing me to come and share today.
Once again, a round of applause for Marcus Atkinson. We thank you so much, Marcus. What a fantastic way to kick off this speaker series. And the empathetic listening is what we hope happens throughout the course of this 4-part series and beyond. As he mentioned, for all of us, the action step is to be the agents of change. So hopefully we can initiate that in all of our circles. Next up, and for more information on Marcus Atkinson too, you can follow the Publix Voice Media on Facebook to keep up to date with all the latest happenings that he's got going on. Thank you again, Marcus. Next up, Brandon Wylie, the founder of OpenedEyes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm thinking that if I don't get Marcus a T-shirt, we're not going to be friends anymore. That's just the vibe that I'm getting. I got you for next time. And I just hit the clicker, right, for the PowerPoint? Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for the Erie Downtown Partnership, for putting this together and having us here. I feel an obligation to talk a little bit about, OpenedEyes as well and exactly what that organization is about before I dive into a little bit about myself and my journey and hearing Brother Marcus talk about intertwining all of this spirituality. I initially wasn't going to focus too heavy on that, but it kind of inspired me to really focus on that because that's really what we're on, is this spiritual journey. And that's what brought me here. I'm not an Erie native, but I've been here for about 15 years now. So I guess you could say I'm what do we call it? Erieites. I'm an Erieite, so this has been my home. And I've appreciated it, and I've loved being here. It's offered me so much opportunity to grow as a person, as a professional, and as what was introduced. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've been doing that for about 7 years now. I went to Gannon University, just a hop, skip, and a jump away. My alma mater, I was there for like 7 years for my bachelor's and my master's degree. It was wonderful. I came here it's been a long journey. I came here as an individual who was very introverted, as an individual who was uncertain of himself. And what has transpired over the years has been something powerful for me. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more in regards to racism and injustice and all of these various things that I've experienced from a different perspective. And I first want to talk real quickly about OpenedEyes because, again, I feel it's just appropriate to kind of set things off in that regard. We're a 501c3 organization, and our goals are to educate on diversity, self-development, implicit bias training, all of these various things. The buzzword now is implicit bias. And, of course, since the year that we had of 2020, of course, brought a lot of interest, more so now that I've ever seen, into these various topics, which is fantastic. We've been founded since 2014, so I've seen this. I've been experiencing this. It wasn't anything really new. And when I do some trainings, I like to talk about, well, what was it for you this past year that really prompted you to want to get engaged or understand more? And a lot of people said, well, it was George Floyd. It was Breonna Taylor. It was, this and that. Things that we've been seeing for quite some time. But what I've been hearing more so than ever, again, it was real to see that video of George Floyd, and it's a very hard video to watch. And for a lot of people, and no pun intended, it opened their eyes. And I think that seeing a lot of these organizations reviewing their institution, their diversity policies, how can they do better? How can we be more inclusive? These are the questions that are being asked right now, which is phenomenal. And I'm happy to be, as Marcus said, to be a part of the conversation. And again, Brother Marcus, I just want to highlight, too, I really appreciate you, my friend. You've been a great mentor and advisor. So, I appreciate you so much. Teme Noche. Does anybody know what that means? It's Latin. It means know thyself. And I don't know if is there any Matrix fans in here, but the movie The Matrix, when Neo's going to see the Oracle, and she's baking her cookies and everything, he walks through the doorway, and on the top of the doorway there is Teme Noche. And again, that whole idea of know thyself, I actually got it tattooed on my back. This is what I believe is the most important element of understanding injustices, the most important thing of understanding our biases and our prejudices, because everybody here has one. We all have a prejudice or a bias of some sort, an implicit bias. And if you think that, if you say that you don't, you're crazy. And that's just facts. It could have been a learned behavior, and implicit also means unconscious. So it's something that you might not even realize that you have. And so part of the Opened Eyes program is about self-reflection. And this is where we differentiate from other programs and other educational programs, is that we like to focus on this idea of mindfulness, because mindfulness is an essential part. And as the Teme Noche says, know thyself. It's an essential part of understanding not only the world around you, but understanding yourself. Because if we don't understand ourselves, we're going to have a heck of a time understanding people around us, the environment around us. So this idea of knowing thyself, again, is such an important element to what it is that we're talking about. And I believe it has to be included in the conversation of diversity education. And I know we all hear the words diversity, inclusion, and what do all these things mean, so on and so forth. Sometimes it seems like it's oversaturated. But if we really dive into those words, we begin to understand that there's a deeper meaning behind them. What does it mean to be inclusive? That means that we're all at the table. There's no excluding. And I feel at times, in my experiences, what turns people away, especially with diversity education and trainings and whatnot, is that people feel left out. And so as I began to reflect and to develop a more comprehensive program, I'm like, you know what, you're right. And I've been there. I've seen these things occur where people are left out and there's a void that's missing. And so what I hope to do with Opened Eyes is to fill that void. And of course, with it's not just one organization, it's not just one person. It takes a community, and we have to do that. But what brought me to this point? I don't know if you can see this here, but it says, "What are you?" When I was in 6th grade, I'm from Sharon Farrell area. I don't know if anybody's familiar or from that area. That's my hometown. When I was in 6th grade, I was walking down the hallway, and this little girl was walking down behind me, and she said, hey. She said, you. She said, "What are you?" And I remember turning around, I'm in 6th grade. I'm in my little thought process. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? She's like, "What are you? You look different." And I remember thinking to myself, I still don't understand what she's trying to ask me. And she said, "What is your racial background? You don't look just white. You don't look just this. You look like you're a mixed. What are you mixed with?" And I was like, why didn't you just say that in the first place? Why didn't you just say what's your racial background? And of course, I went home that night and I talked to my mom and I said, Mom, I said, this little girl asked me what I was, and I've never been asked this question before, and I don't know how to respond to it. How do I respond? What does that mean? What did she mean? And she goes, being a mom, and I think it was reflecting back on that now, I truly believe it was one of her, I don't want to say her worst nightmares, but it was something that she feared that was going to happen. and she wasn't really prepared for it. And that wasn't her fault. But she said, oh, you know, Brandy Poo, and nobody else calls me Brandy Poo but my mother. She still calls me today. She's watching on live. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. She said, oh, Brandy Poo, you know, you're just you. You're just you. And I was like, well, that doesn't, you know, I get that. I understand that. But what am I? You know, now the narrative has changed. You know, and my father is of African American descent. My mother is of Italian descent. And when they got connected, that was interracial relationships was still like, especially coming from my all Italian family that was keep it in the family in the Italian realm. We don't go outside of races. That was a big deal. It was a very big deal, and there was a lot of disconnect, and there was a lot of family and friends that left my mother, and I don't talk to family to this day because of that, and I've had to learn to grow, and I've had to learn to deal with that understanding. So anyways, I heard that question, and then it was almost like a domino effect because that little girl almost set the tone for the rest of my life. Because as soon as I heard that question from her, I began to hear it from everybody. And every time I heard it, it destroyed me a little bit more. It just took away from my identity. And for those of you who are familiar with Erik Erikson and psychosocial stages of development, one of the stages of development is identity crisis. And I had an identity crisis at a very, very early age. And what stemmed from that was anxiety, lifelong anxiety, episodes of depression, suicidal thoughts. Many times I wanted to take my life throughout middle school and high school because I didn't feel like I was a part of this world. And you know, I kept it to myself a lot of the times, and that was hard. But I would cry. I would come home from school. I would cry. I hated being mixed. Just to be blatant about it. I felt that because I was biracial, multiracial, however you want to describe it, that was my curse. That was the thing that was going to prevent me from elevating in life, because that was my experience. And when I talk about racism and when I talk about prejudice, I'm not talking about just things that I see or whatever, you know, here and there. I'm talking about things that I lived. I'm talking about things that I've experienced. When I go into these trainings, I'm not telling you something that I just, because it's the flavor of the month and racism is the new topic right now. No, I'm talking about my life and what I've experienced and what I still experience. And now I have a son. So that's another different element. But as I got older, and again, I continued to hear these questions. What are you? What are you? You don't know. You're not. And even when I would say what I was, they would say, no, you're not. And I'm like, I can't win. So now I'm broken. And it carried out through high school. And we're talking about the spiritual journey. I ended up coming to Erie for college. And what brought me to Erie was, interestingly enough, I entered the St. Mark's Seminary School to be a Catholic priest. And when I tell people that, they're like, get the hell out of here. No, you really did not. And that's the truth. That's the honest to God truth. That's what brought me here. We're talking about divine intervention. That's what we're talking about. And so I was a little out of place when I got up here. But nonetheless, the experience was the experience. And there was good and then there was bad. But it brought me here. And I never in a million years would have ever anticipated in just being in this moment with you guys. And I'm sorry, but just being in this moment, I'm just reflecting. I'm like, wow, I can't even believe I'm in this moment where I'm doing this. But to be in this moment, I never would have anticipated. I didn't anticipate to live. I didn't anticipate to be anything in life. I had a guidance counselor told me that I would probably never make it in college because I wasn't that academically strong. Socially, I was not socially strong. Again, I was an introvert. But things change. And people change. And we're given new opportunities. And I felt like I had a restart in life when I came here. It was a challenge, don't get me wrong. It was a challenge because I still heard the questions. What are you? You look different. I still had to completely identify myself, and I had to always, clap back at people. And this is who I am. This is what I am. How are you going to tell me? And so that got exhausting over the course of time. And then I got to grad school, and things started to take a turn even more so there. And this is going to sound very Martin Luther Kingish of me, but I had a dream. A literal dream. I was my last year of grad school, and I had this dream of writing a book. And the book was called What Are You? And I remember thinking to myself, now why in the hell would I write a book about the question that I hate hearing the most? Why would I do that? There was such a negative association with it. The thing that I feel almost took me out, because I wanted to kill myself. The question I always heard, the very question, why would I embrace that? And then I began to reflect a little more. And then I began to think, I can strip its power away. I can strip the negative association away and make it my own. And that's what I did. So I began to write about my life, about where I was at, about race, about the things that I experienced. And I had never written a book in my life. I used to hate writing. So I'm like, why am I doing this? But I did it because that was the vision. And then I'm having a conversation with a friend as we're driving back from Erie to Sharon. And he says, you should turn your book idea into a program. And I'm like, oh, man, I can't. And I got like ADD. So I'm like, what? Squirrel. So I'm like, what's going on? I got to do that again? So now I'm trying to write a book that I've never done before. And now you want me to start a program? I'm like, Lord, please help me. What am I going to do? So that intrigued me. So I began to think, if I write this book, create this program, it could be leadership-based, leadership-focused. I could talk about my life. I can help other people. And that's where OpenedEyes came from. This idea back in 2014 of just life experiences. There's nothing, OpenedEyes was not created based off of sunshine and rainbows and butterflies. There was nothing, it's beautiful now, but what came from it, the trials, the tribulations that I experienced, that's what OpenedEyes stemmed from trial, from struggle. And I used to always hear that quote, pain is love. And it made more sense as I got older. And that's where I really started to focus my energy. Instead of getting mad about racial discrimination, instead of getting mad about the things that I heard about myself, I turned it around and I used it for fuel. And I think about how important that is. If we are faced with negativity or if we are faced with challenges, how do we confront them? What do we convert them to? More negativity or more positivity? I asked myself a question. I said, I do no longer want to be part of the problem. I want to be a part of the solution. And that's what brought me to this point. And I feel like we can all be there. And that's part of that inclusion piece that I'm talking about. There's so much going on in our country right now. There's so much going on in our community right now that's heavily divided, believe it or not. And there's a lot of work that we need to do together, but we all have to come to the table. And that's what this is all about. That's what this is all about. And when we do things like this, when we're here in communion with one another and we're able to have these conversations and we're able to talk about our experiences, these are the things that make the mission progressive. These are the ways that we continue to thrive and rise up. And again, there's not one person, there's not one organization that is going to do that. We must all do that together. And just some things that I want you guys to think about as we're talking about these various topics. These are just some of the things that came to mind as I was building the program, and certain things that along the way that have developed from the program. This idea of equality versus equity, proportional representation and equal access. Equality is not the same as equity. Implicit biases and microaggressions. Unconscious stereotyping and unintentional discrimination. Microaggressions, for those who are not familiar, that's that idea, and I'm going to give you an example. When I was, you always hear, you're black, but you're not black. Right? I I don't want to say I was dating them. I was talking to somebody, a white woman, and we were not dating, but we were talking about, getting, dating and whatnot. And she said, yeah, you're black, but you're not black. And like the friends you hang around with who are black, yeah, they're not black. And I asked her, I said, well, can you please describe what do you mean? Please elaborate on what you mean. What's black? Blackity black. What is that? So I don't think she thought that I was going to challenge her on that. But that's an example of what a microaggression is. And another example of some of the things that we have to hear. So is it because I'm educated that I'm not a black guy? What does it mean to talk white? Oh, that black dude talks white. Oh, that white guy talks black. What does that mean? And guess what? I used to say those things. My friend, my peer group, we used to say those things. And I think about how ignorant that was. What does that mean? Oh, you dress black, you dress white. How ignorant of us. But these are the things that we talk about when we say implicit or unconscious biases. These are the things that are in our minds that we don't even are aware of. They just come out. And that's why I challenge people to really consider and to really think about your prejudices, because you have them. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean you're a racist person. It just means that you have something in you that you may not have been acknowledged fully. Yes, sir. Heard that one too a couple of times. But a perfect example. I've heard that many times as well. So these are the various things that we need to continue to address in our community, because we are plagued with them. And Erie is a beautiful city, and there is a lot of great potential here, and we have a lot of culture and diversity. Do I believe that it's fostered the way it should be? Absolutely not. We can do better, and we need to do better. The third concept you see here is group cohesion. So how do we do better? By working cohesively to do it. Creating and finding meaningful connections. This is how we make the mission progressive. And this is one of my favorite ones. As a therapist, we use this all the time. And this concept goes across the board. The problem that we have in our society, and I'm talking on a very general scale, is that we listen to respond and not listen to understand. When I'm in therapy with someone, I have to be in the moment with them, regardless of our differences. I have to be attentive to what they're saying. You see all this stuff, and I'm guilty of it as well. How often are we on Facebook and we get into these little debates, and then we just get going, and then we're like, all of a sudden we're getting unfriended by 30 people. We're unfriending 30 people, including our family members. It gets wild. I've seen that a lot the past year, and especially when in regards to politics, forget about it. Like, that's the worst that you can see. And it baffles me. And I have to give this example because this is a perfect example. I saw a thread, a status, and an individual posted a status. A person commented on it. And the person who commented on the status was agreeing with the status. In some way, shape, or form, that other person started to attack that individual. And that individual was like, whoa, I'm agreeing with you. Did you actually read my statement? And I thought to myself, and I was baffled by it. I'm like, we are so charged up and so impulsive that even when people agree with us, we think that they are not. Now, that's a crazy concept to think about. Now, imagine how we feel when somebody is complete opposite of us. It's dangerous. It's like we can't have a formidable or a reputable conversation without getting malicious. We can have differences. That's the beauty of diversity. That is diversity. Diverse perspectives, diverse mindsets. That's what makes us unique. No matter what color you are, we are all diverse in some way. So active listening, I really want to encourage you to practice that this coming weekend and week. Really think about, am I being an active listener to my partner, to my friends, to my coworkers, to my family, whatever capacity you feel. Practice some active listening and see how the communication factor changes and how that dynamic changes even further. And then, of course, the word privilege. Identity, factors leading to life coincidences and inconveniences. And this is always a tough topic for people, especially when we talk about the word white privilege. But privileges come in all shapes and sizes. We all have certain privileges, and privileges actually can be used for power. As a person of color, I'm privileged in this sense. I'm educated. I have a license. That means I can get jobs that other people can't as a licensed professional counselor. That's a privilege of mine. As an able-bodied individual, as ageism, there's various things that you can have privileges on. And I think when we hear the word white privilege, we automatically shut down. Like, I struggle in life. It doesn't mean that you haven't. And so I think we need to start, again, being active listeners and talking these things out and understanding that privilege goes across the board. We all have some shape and form. And then, of course, these last three concepts here, systemic, racism, structural gaps, and disadvantages. Servant leadership. This is a concept that I really incorporated into our program because, and not just servant leadership, it just so happened to put servant leadership down, but it kind of ties into that understanding that if we are not being good leaders, and we're not handling our situation, how can we serve other people well? How can we serve the institute? And I just recently did a training for an institution that I won't name, but I did it for their presidential cabinet and for a university. And they wanted to know, and they were an all-white presidential cabinet, and they want to know, how can we be better? How can we include inclusion more into our students? How can we do it with our faculty? How can we be more inclusive individuals? And we talked about that. We said, you know what? First, you got to understand where's the biases. And that incorporates implicit, that incorporates workplace bias. And now as leaders, now that we are recognizing our biases, what are we going to do to correct them to appropriately and effectively serve the people that are under us or with us, the students? How are we tending to their needs? And as an executive director of an organization, I reflect on this leadership. What am I doing to best the people that are around me? Because I have a great group of individuals, a great peer group around me. So it's, again, as you're seeing a theme here, the theme is self-reflection. The theme is mindfulness-based practices. The theme is self-care. And these may be things you never thought about in regards to diversity education, but they are essential pieces into progression. And then, of course, our LGBTQIA plus brothers and sisters, we incorporate, programming and things with that. And so I want to end here with this idea, and this is something that I want you to practice for yourselves and for people that are watching. Because I'm such a big self-reflection guy, I'm a big proponent of enhancing our social IQ. And what exactly is our social intelligence IQ? What is the social IQ? Those are these self-reflective questions. Am I being aware of my thoughts? Am I being aware of others? Am I aware of how others impact me? And how do I react to that impact? How do I impact others? Am I being mindful of the cultural and generational shifts? And do I allow my biases to interfere with those I work with? These are just some exercises. Physically, we exercise to get in shape, right? We got to be consistent, though. You don't go to the gym one night, work out for an hour, and the next morning you're in the best shape of your life. It's about perseverance. It's about consistency. Well, the same goes for our minds. If we're not exercising our minds consistently, we're doing ourselves a disservice. We won't be able to meditate appropriately. And when I encourage people to meditate, they say, well, I tried it a couple times, it ain't working. Keep on trying. It's mental exercise. We become better people. And if we become better people, the people around us are going to be better for it. You're no good to nobody else if you're not good to yourself. And so I at the end of all this here, I just want to say first and foremost that, and I want to leave a little bit of time for any questions that anybody has. I'd be more than happy to answer them. How I've dealt and handled this the injustices that I've experienced and my family's experience is by converting it into something positive for myself. And I always wasn't like that. I was reactive. And because I was reactive, I was angry. I didn't know how to manage my emotions. I didn't know how to appropriately communicate with other individuals, even if, especially if they were way different than me. And I still have a hard time with it at times. It's an ongoing process. It's like long-term recovery. You never stop. It's ongoing. But we have to be consistent and we have to persevere. And again, in this community that I'm in right now, I'm very blessed and honored to be a part of the conversation. And I am blessed and honored to be around others who are like-minded. And I just want to encourage you all here and those that are listening to continue to push the agenda. If we just sit back and relax and just sweep things under the table, it's only going to build up. It's only going to build up, and it's only going to manifest into something negative, and it's only going to manifest into something worse. We have to be proactive in our efforts. And so I want to thank you all for joining us for our first series. We're going to have more lecture series. I believe is a 4-part series. And I'm just very, very thankful, again, to be here with you all. And I appreciate all of you who have attended and listened. And for those who are out there in Facebook land, thank you to you all for attending. So I appreciate it, and thank you again so much.
Stay up here for a second. Can we get Marcus up here as well? If anybody has any questions for either of our speakers, we'll open up the floor to questions now. You could just go over to the audience microphone over there on the side. Well, if not, I want to thank you, a real sincere thank you to our two speakers. I think this was an amazing first lecture. Very, very proud to present this series with OpenedEyes as the Erie Downtown Partnership. And I think Brandon said, speaking about racism, addressing racism and these issues head on shouldn't be treated as a fad or the flavor of the month. Racial equity and inclusion is not just a box to check at work. It's not just an Instagram post. I think challenging our implicit biases and learning to listen to our neighbors, actively listen to our neighbors, is something that can make us all better. Better at our jobs, better friends, better family, and better people. So please check out OpenedEyes, our partner in this lecture series. They have social media, Facebook and Instagram, and check out our website, eriedowntown.com, for our events calendar to see our next lecture dates and all the great things we have downtown this summer, concerts, markets, movies, etc., happening in downtown Erie. Thank you again, and thank you to both Marcus and Brandon.
Thank you to Ellie Vehi, too. Shout out to my team member, Ellie, for putting all this together, too, as well. We appreciate you.
And you can tell she's on the team because she has the T-shirt on.